They took a World War II veteran. The sentence landed in the room like a gunshot. It was 2 in the morning when Maria ran into a rusted garage where a group of riders gathered, her scrubs muddied and her voice shaking. She held out her phone with a video open and said, "You have to see this. They are moving Tom tomorrow." Tom Whitaker was 97, a wiry man with a weathered veteran cap and a limp that told more stories than his medals. The injustice was simple and brutal. His son Daniel had forged documents, altered prescriptions, and planned to move him into a facility that would empty his trust account. The papers were on a tablet, time-stamped for 8 in the morning. "We do nothing and it is over," Maria said, whispering as if the walls might take pity. "We do something," Jack replied, his voice low and steady, the same voice that had rallied men after bar fights and after funerals. The promise hung in the air. What followed would not be a clean legal rescue, but it would be justice of a different kind, and everyone would see it unfold. They debated like a jury with no judge, and the room smelled of motor oil, strong coffee, and the faint chemical tang of disinfectant from Maria's scrubs. Jack paced, fingers tapping the rim of a metal cup. Sam leaned against a toolbox and chewed his lip. Lena, who lived 2 houses down from Tom, rubbed her palms together and kept glancing at the phone. Nurse Karen, who worked the night shift, checked her watch as if time were a living thing that could be bargained with. "If we crash the gate, the police will arrest us," Sam said. "If we do nothing, they will strip him of everything," Lena answered, voice tight. Jack looked at each other. "What would Tom want?" he asked. "To breathe air that smells like his garden," Maria said quietly. "To hear the radio again," Lena added. The room filled with short sentences, yes and no. Pauses where the cold metal of helmets seemed to hold the answer. 8 people talked in quick exchange, each line a small drumbeat toward a decision. Jack finally said, "We move at 4. We bring witnesses. We do it clean and public. Who stands with me?" Hands rose, faces set. The clatter of keys, the zip of a jacket, and the metallic click of a helmet closing became the soundtrack as they prepared. Text messages flew to more riders, to an old lawyer named Harris who was retired but never really left the courthouse, and to Officer Ruiz, a cop who had once been a Marine and who owed Tom a debt he could not explain. The engines woke like a flock of sleeping beasts. Rain had started as a constellation of cold beads, and the smell of wet asphalt mixed with leather and heated metal. The convoy rolled out, tires hissing. Lights cutting through the fog. The journey felt cinematic and terrified at once. Maria rode in the passenger seat of an old pickup, her palms damp, the phone between her knees playing the same clip on loop. "He looks smaller than the video," she said. Jack answered, "He is smaller, but he is Tom." The group counted off names to keep track, 1 through 8, each voice clipped and practical. Sam hummed an old wartime march under his breath, and Lena recited a poem Tom used to love. The route took them past the church with its broken bell, past a gas station where the attendant tipped his hat, and finally to the white fence surrounding Maple Grove Nursing Home. The fence creaked under the rain, and the gate was open, a small oversight that felt like fate. They came to a stop, the smell of antiseptic and hospital soap replacing the highway air. The night nurse, a lean woman named Karen, appeared with an anxious smile, and then lowered it when she saw Daniel, who wore a new suit and a cold expression. The first words exchanged at the gate were clipped. "We have legal documents," Daniel said, holding a folder. Maria stepped forward with the phone. "You do not," she said, and then she played the video that showed Daniel signing an electronic consent form under the supervision of a young man whose badge did not match any hospital name. Voices rose. Daniel accused, Maria rebutted. Officer Ruiz called in backup, but his tone betrayed uncertainty. Judge Harris arrived in his slippers because someone had woken him, and he stood under an awning looking like authority aged into softness. "I am here to witness and to preserve," he said. The presence of a retired judge changed the tenor. Arguments unfolded like rounds of a court drama. "This is forgery," Judge Harris said after watching the clips and the timestamp. "This is medical malpractice bordering on criminal neglect," Maria added, brandishing a printout of Tom's medication logs. Daniel snapped, "This was legal counsel. I have power of attorney." Jack walked up close and said, "You have papers. We have video, witnesses, audio of you saying you wanted the trust. Which will the county believe?" The air tasted metallic with tension. Allegations became specifics. Nurse Karen produced a vial she had found in a drawer, its label smudged. Lena described the smell she had noticed on Tom's breath last week, a sweet rot that made her stomach turn. The exchanges were many, at least 8 short back and forths, each adding weight. At one point, Tom was wheeled into the hallway, and his voice, thin but clear, broke the room. "My boy loves money more than me," he said, and the sentence landed like a verdict. People cried, people cursed. The conversation slowed into plans. They could not simply take him and vanish. They would document everything. They would secure an alternative place for Tom. "If this goes wrong, we—"
"Sue," Judge Harris said. "If it goes right, we save a life," Jack answered. Before they left, they asked viewers to weigh in on what community meant. Play the clip, figure out who is right, and then decide to act. If you would do the same, the question hung in the ether like rain. If you are feeling anger or the urge to act, you are not alone. What you just heard touches a basic instinct to protect the vulnerable. Tell us in the comments, would you have joined them? Write, "I would have gone," or "I would not have gone," and add one sentence explaining why. Your short answer helps everyone see how ordinary people judge extraordinary choices. Your comment can be one small part of a bigger conversation about protecting elders, checking power, and finding lawful ways to intervene. We read every reply and share the most thoughtful ones in follow-ups. Now back to what happened on that wet morning when a convoy became the jury for one man. They moved Tom with cautious theater. The team prepared documents, recordings, and witnesses. Maria recorded a walk around the room, the camera catching the faded war photos on the wall, the smell of old tobacco in the armchair, the scratch of oxygen tubing. Dialogue at the bedside was careful and long. "Tom," Jack said softly, "we are here to help." Tom blinked and smiled. The skin around his eyes creased like maps. "You are my family," he said, "not the people who count my money." Sam asked practical questions. Can he walk? Tom tried, the floor creaking, the scent of linoleum and lemon cleaner sharp in the air. Nurse Karen read a medical chart aloud, and every line she read was a potential line of defense. Daniel shouted from the doorway. His voice was high and panicked, but the group responded with measured phrases, 8 or 9 back and forths, each answer recorded. They loaded Tom into the pickup with blankets that smelled like wool and engine oil. Lena pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling heat, then cool. The convoy left under a drizzle that had started to freeze the world, the sound of tires a steady heartbeat. Once they had Tom safe, they took him to a farmhouse owned by a retired Marine named Pastor Miguel, who lived off a gravel road and kept bees. The house smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. They set up a room with a radio, a chair by the window, and a small cabinet where his medications were locked and logged. The first night was full of small rituals. Jack boiled tea, and it smelled of chamomile and sugar. Maria sat on a crate and asked simple questions. "Do you want the sweater? Do you want to hear the march?" Tom answered in fragments and laughed when Sam put on an old record. There were many exchanges, the kind that stitch lives back together. "Where is your hat?" "On the chair." "Do you want to call someone?" "No." "Do you need water?" "No." Each repetition was a stitch. They called an attorney, and Judge Harris began assembling a file with scanned signatures, screen captures, and timestamps. They documented how medications had been swapped. A pharmacist named Elena later explained in writing that a routine sedative had been replaced with a higher dose and that the vial labels had been tampered with, an explanation that required a forensic read of pharmacy logs and surveillance footage at the clinic. The technical description of the process ran to 300 words in the report, describing lot numbers, chain of custody failures, and signage inconsistencies that someone with knowledge of prescriptions would spot immediately. Investigations unfolded. Evidence was concrete. A video from a security camera at the clinic showed Daniel entering at odd hours with a young technician who later admitted to making the digital signature. The medication logs had timestamps that did not match dispensing records. An audio file captured a phone call where Daniel discussed the trust with a contractor. Officer Ruiz took statements from Lena, Maria, Sam, Jack, Nurse Karen, and Pastor Miguel, and each testimony matched the timeline. Daniel was arrested and charged with forgery, elder abuse, and attempted financial exploitation. The local physician who had signed off on the transfer was reported to the medical board for negligence. The sheriff placed temporary protective custody of Tom, and Judge Harris filed emergency motions to void the power of attorney. The courtroom scenes were intense, and the exchanges there included cross-examination in which Daniel stammered and attorneys laid out a web of emails and photos. The evidence seemed to collapse his defense piece by piece. Prosecutors pointed to the pattern of changes in medication as a motive to control. The plea was not immediate. There were hearings, testimony, and legal wrangling, but the documents and videos had made the outcome inevitable. 1 month later, Tom had settled into the farmhouse at Willow Ridge. He ate breakfast at 8 and walked the small garden with Lena, who came by 3 times a week. The community had raised $5,000 to cover immediate costs. Nurse Karen visited and kept a strict log of his medications, and pharmacist Elena volunteered to audit every prescription. There were 15 volunteers listed on the roster, and Pastor Miguel organized a small routine of songs on Sunday afternoons. Tom had regained weight, his color improved, and his laughter returned on odd afternoons when Sam would mimic an old radio announcer. 3 months after the rescue, the county had filed formal charges against Daniel. He faced a potential sentence that included restitution and probation. The medical board had suspended the physician involved pending review, and a civil suit for financial exploitation was underway. The farmhouse at Willow Ridge had become a small hub of activism. Donations had grown to $32,000, enough to hire a part-time nurse and to buy a van for medical transport needs.
Appointments. A formal nonprofit began the paperwork under the name Veterans Garden Fund, with Jack as a signatory and Lena handling community outreach. The fund promised to provide housing support for elders at risk and to partner with local pharmacies to create tamper-proof medication logs. 6 months after the night when they took Tom, the legacy was visible in numbers and in small, stubborn human details. The Veterans Garden Fund officially registered as a nonprofit and had 12 monthly donors pledging recurring amounts. Willow Ridge housed 8 elders and offered daycare services for another 12 who lived nearby. Judge Harris had visited and spoke at a fundraiser, his voice steady as he recited the case as a reminder of civic duty. Daniel had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in a plea agreement that required restitution, community service, and a 5-year supervision order. The physician received a formal reprimand and mandatory ethics training. Officer Ruiz helped establish a local task force to proactively review elder care complaints and intercept suspicious financial transfers. The community reported that hospital oversight improved after pharmacy audits uncovered lax controls, and the county instituted a simple double sign-off for medication changes that had prevented further incidents. Tom himself became a symbol, not just a patient. He presided over a small veterans' breakfast at Willow Ridge where 20 people attended, where his hearing aids squeaked occasionally and his hand shook when he lifted a toast. The camera caught the precise moment his eyes misted, and he said, "They kept my stories alive." Names that mattered were repeated at meetings and on plaques. Maria as the one who ran, Jack as the organizer, Nurse Karen as the watchful caregiver, Pastor Miguel as the provider of shelter, Elena the pharmacist who verified the tampering, Lena the neighbor who would not look away, Judge Harris the legal guardian of the process. Donations paid for a plaque in Tom's name and for a small scholarship for veterans in need. The legal consequences were real, and the community adjustments were measurable. The farmhouse employed a nurse named Rebecca and a full-time coordinator named Omar, and the fund published quarterly reports that listed expenses, services delivered, and the number of elders helped. In the end, the story closed on a small scene at a garden where Tom planted a sapling next to an old flagpole. He held the shovel with hands that had lifted rifles and harvests, and the crowd around him was a patchwork of leather jackets and church shirts, of suits and scrubs. They had taken him when they believed the law might not. They had made their case in public and used proof, witnesses, recordings, and the courtroom in that order. The result was legal consequences for those who abused power and a tangible legacy for those who needed protection. If this story moved you, share it so other communities know what is possible when neighbors choose action. Subscribe to follow updates on the Veterans Garden Fund and other cases where ordinary people stepped in to make justice happen. Sometimes the best guardians do not wear titles. Sometimes they wear helmets and aprons, and they answer when someone runs in at 2 in the morning.